The night presses close, and in the hush before dawn I dare to speak. Life is suffering. This is not a plea for pity, but a quiet dispelling of illusion. When the mind finally stills, the raw substance of our existence is revealed endless desire set against the nothingness that births it. The first breath of truth is cold, but it shakes the drowsy complacency that cloaks the soul. We go on chasing fleeting joyous approval, pleasure, success like moths around the dying embers of a candle. Our hearts whisper that the next moment will bring relief, yet the next moment always arrives, unchanged. Each triumph is a hollow echo, each ambition a promise written on sand. Modernity offers itself as cure, but its remedies are soot and mirrors. Social applause, digital validation, fleeting intoxications all beguile like opiates, softening the pain only to deepen the wound. But suffering is not a curse, it is a path. In the stillness that follows hope's collapse, our consciousness sharpens. Pain becomes a teacher more patient than any philosopher. We begin to discern the architecture of the will, an insatiable force that drives us to seek meaning in the meaningless, form in the void. Every desire is a chain, every attachment, a shadow that blinds. Yet there is strange solace in this clarity. The moment we stop disguising pain as failure, we release ourselves from its tyranny. We stop running, we stand in the ruin and breathe. We realize, we are not destroyed by suffering, we are defined by it. A wound does not cease to be a wound because we name it. Naming brings containment, not obliteration. Think of the traveler who loses his way in a fog. Panic would only make him wander deeper. But if he stands still, listens, and observes the feel of wind and ground, the fog thins. Awareness becomes a guide. Similarly, when we stop erecting barricades of hope, the fog of our illusions parts. We glimpse the contours of our own solitude, and in that bare loneliness there is peace. And so it is that we come to understand modern illusions as ephemera, celebrity, wealth, comfort. These are not wrong in themselves, but as fulcrums of our existence, they become prisons. Their promise of perpetual satisfaction collapses the moment we believe it. We chase, and the gap widens. The quiet remedy, to watch ourselves chase. To see desire arise like waves on a shore, crest, and fall back, again and again. In observing, the compulsion loosens. Moments of release come like rainfall on cracked earth. The first drop is shock, the second, recognition, the third, acceptance. Tears may follow, or silence, but relief is already here. The world has not changed, but our relationship to it has. We cease to suffer from suffering itself. We face it, we embody it. We let it flow through, without adding stories, judgments, or hope. Amid the wreckage of every expectation, a core remains. Awareness. Not the bright clarity of triumph, but the quiet glow of being awake. It is a lantern in the ruin of illusions. It is the witness that sees both the pain and the illusion, and yet remains untouched. It is the stillness within the storm. In that stillness we discover, there is nothing to do, nowhere to go. The ego's urgency unravels. We do not transcend suffering by escaping it, but by finding no place in us where it can hold us prisoner. We are not the suffering. We are the space in which suffering arises and dissolves. At last, the script unravels itself in a single breath. We have walked through the gloom, the deceptive promises of pleasure, the tyranny of desire, the collapse of hope, and the shuddering encounter with raw pain. We have knelt at the threshold of illusions and found them dry, brittle, dissolving. We have seen that suffering is not a flaw in existence, but its pulses natural as birth, as inevitable as death. And in the silence that remains, a strange serenity blooms not, the cheer of denial, but the sobriety of acceptance. We do not depart with joy, nor with victory. We depart with resignation, but it is a resignation touched by lucidity. We disappear, not into paradise, but into presence. Our script ends not with flourish, but with fading. A single candle extinguished, leaving only the deep, tranquil night. Suffering does not knock its seeps. It enters not as a tempest, but as a quiet weight behind the eyes, a heaviness in the limbs. It disguises itself as fatigue, boredom, restlessness. It waits in line with us, rides in the passenger seat, lies awake at night whispering nothing. This suffering is not loud. Its quietness is what makes it eternal. We suffer not only in moments of despair, but in the perpetual motion of the will itself. The will does not rest, it only pauses to lurch forward again. A moment of peace is merely the breath between cravings. What we call happiness is but the silence between the pangs. And so we are never whole, only less broken for a time. Illusion is not something we believe, it is what we are. We are shaped by the myths we inherit, by the stories of purpose, progress, and personal greatness. But these are masks sewn onto a void. We call them goals, identities, callings. They are distractions that keep the will occupied, like toys given to a child before sleep. Yet sleep does not come, and the child grows older, hungrier, more haunted. Modernity has perfected the art of distraction. It offers novelty as nourishment and noise as comfort. We scroll, consume, pursue, all while avoiding the mirror. But the mirror waits. It does not shout. It waits. And when we are finally still enough, when the blue light fades and the world no longer entertains us, the mirror shows us what we are, a being stretched between longing and loss, a consciousness chained to a wheel it cannot stop turning. Detachment is not escape, it is clarity. It is not the refusal to feel, but the refusal to cling, to watch desire rise and fall without mistaking it for self, to see beauty and not demand it stay, to let pain pass through without building a shrine to it. Detachment is not indifference, it is intimacy without possession. Love, too, is a mirror of suffering. We love not because we are whole, but because we are wounded. We reach for the other not to celebrate ourselves, but to forget. In love we taste briefly the illusion of fusion, of completion, and when that fades us it must we grieve not the other, but the return of our own fragmentation. Every bond is a reprieve, and every loss a return to what has always been. And yet, there is beauty in this futility, not the bright beauty of triumph, but the somber grace of endurance. A tree bending under snow does not curse the weight it yields, it survives. So too must we bend, not in submission to fate, but in recognition of it. We bow not because we are defeated, but because we see clearly now that there is no victory here. Time itself is the architect of despair. It gives just enough to awaken longing, and then takes. Every present becomes past, every joy decays into memory. What we love dies, what we build crumbles. What we hope for recedes like a ship swallowed by fog. But it is in this decay that we learn to see the structure of the real, not made of permanence, but of vanishing. To live without illusion is not to live without meaning, but to see meaning as a breath, not a structure, as something that arises in a moment, not as a destiny. The bird does not sing to prove its purpose. The moon does not rise to fulfill a plan. They exist, they pass, they vanish, and we too must learn to vanish not with terror, but with reverence for the silence we return to. There is no triumph waiting, no secret door beyond which pain ceases. There is only this moment, this breath, this awareness of the ever-present dance between yearning and yielding. To see it, without flinching, is to begin to be free not of pain, but of illusion. We are not called to conquer suffering, only to witness it fully. And in that witnessing, something deeper than joy awakens a stillness that does not move, a silence that does not speak, a peace not dependent on relief, but on surrender. The will is a hunger that knows no satisfaction. Even when it gets what it seeks, it finds within the fruit a bitterness. The child wants the toy, the lover the beloved, the wanderer the destination. But the moment desire achieves its object, the shimmer fades, and the ache begins again. Thus existence becomes a cycle of reaching and regretting, of pursuing and perishing in the very fulfillment of pursuit. We are driven, not by what we need, but by what we imagine we lack, and this imagination is endless. Beneath the architecture of modern life, its networks, its wealth, its rituals of productivity, there lies the same primal agitation. The ancient cry for significance dressed in new language. It whispers from within career ambitions, self-improvement plans, curated digital selves. But behind the curtain, the same ghostly voice persists. I do not know who I am. I do not know why I suffer. I do not know how to be still. And so the frenzy continues, polished and professional, but no less desperate. The self, so proudly asserted, is a fiction composed of memory and will. We guard it, we embellish it, we speak of it as if it were solid. But in quiet moments, in those fragile interludes when no one is watching and the noise recedes, we feel its transparency. The self is not a fortress, but a veil. And behind that veil, there is no actor, only the endless movement of consciousness, reacting, grasping, avoiding. The I is not a substance, but a shimmer upon the surface of the deep. This deep, the silent awareness beneath the personality, beneath the ego's narrative, is untouched by the will. It sees the suffering, but it does not resist it. It feels the desires, but it does not attach. It watches the mind chase ghosts, and it does not run after. In it, there is no ambition, no identity, no destination. It is presence without purpose. And to taste it, even for a moment, is to see that what we are seeking is not in front of us, but behind us. Not in becoming, but in ceasing to become. The horror of existence lies not in violence or death, but in the futility of striving. To strive is to believe that this moment is not enough, that the next must redeem it. But the next moment comes, and it too is declared unworthy. And so time becomes a treadmill of dissatisfaction, an endless postponement of peace. The world tells us we must try harder, think positively, work on ourselves. But the truth whispers another path. Do less, see more, let go. Letting go is not passive, it is the deepest act of strength. To release the fantasy of control, to abandon the hope of arriving, to sit in the nakedness of the know-this is detachment. It does not numb the pain, but it reveals its boundaries. Pain is no longer a tyrant, but a visitor. Suffering no longer defines us, but passes through us like weather through trees. We bend, we creak, we remain. All relationships mirror the futility of the will. We reach for others in hope they will fill the void. But they too are voids wrapped in form, reaching in turn. Two absences touching do not become presence. Love cannot complete. Use it can only accompany us in our incompletion. And when it fails, as it must, we are returned not to loneliness, but to the solitude that has always been there, waiting for us to acknowledge it. Solitude is not a punishment. It is the return to what is true. Only in solitude can the illusions die. Only there does the mind quiet enough to hear what has been waiting all along. Not answers, but awareness. Not solutions, but surrender. Not pleasure, but presence. In the silence, the self dissolves. And what remains is not a person, but a pulsive, bare awareness of being. To walk this path is not heroic. It is not something to achieve. It is a falling away of all that sought achievement. It is not transcendence as light, and elevation it is descent, burial, decomposition. The ego rots, and in its place something quiet grows. A knowing that has no name, a peace that does not sparkle, a love that asks for nothing. And when death comes, it comes not as a thief, but as a release. The will ceases, the striving ends. What remains is not reward, not punishment, but stillness. We fear death not because it is painful, but because it strips us of the illusions we clutch. But if we let those illusions go while still alive, then death is only a continuation of what we have already accepted. The end of noise, the end of hunger, the end of becoming. This, then, is the meaning of suffering. It is not a detour, it is the way. It strips us of what is false. It reveals the fragile beauty of each moment. It brings us to the edge of the self, and asks us to step off. Not into bliss, not into heaven, but into the open arms of nothingness. Nothingness is not absence. It is the silence that holds all presence. It is not void, it is space. And in this space, at last, we do not ask what is next. We do not seek to understand. We do not need to know who we are. We simply are. And then, we are not. To suffer is to awaken. It is the slow unraveling of the veil, thread by thread, until what we called life is revealed not as a promise, but as a procession, a quiet march through fog and shadow, where each joy is framed by its own vanishing. What we call awakening is not the acquisition of wisdom, but the fading of hope. Hope, the great sedative of the will, is not a virtue, but a narcotic. It sustains the dream when the dream has already turned rancid. It is the smile we force upon the face of despair. We suffer not because life is cruel, but because it is indifferent. The universe does not explain, it does not comfort. It moves, it burns, it forgets. And we, small flickers of consciousness, invent meaning to hide this indifference from ourselves. We build religions, ideologies, myths of destiny. Not because they are true, but because the truth is too still, too cold, too silent. Yet, in that silence lies the only form of peace, not dependent on illusion. There is no cosmic justice. The good suffer, the wicked thrive, and the stars remain unmoved. Karma, providence, and divine order are scaffolds we erect to make the void bearable. But the void does not need to be bearable. It needs to be seen. In seeing it, fully and without narrative, we cease demanding that the world mirror our moral dreams. We relinquish the childish bargain that suffering must have purpose, that pain must lead to growth, that tragedy is only misunderstood grace. There is no prize for endurance, no reward at the end of the journey. The journey is the unraveling. We begin with identities and goals, and finish with ashes. This is not bleak, it is true. And in truth, there is a strange gentleness. To no longer strive, to no longer require the world to make sense, is to finally sit in the quiet of what is. The wind passes, the leaves fall. The heart breaks, and there is no one to blame, no lesson to learn. Only this moment, raw and unadorned. We mistake memory for continuity. We believe the past still lives in us, that it gives us shape. But memory is not solid, it is a flicker, an echo. The self we remember is already gone, and the self we project is a fantasy. The only reality is the one we resist. This moment, already fading. Identity is a narrative the mind tells to preserve the illusion of control. But there is no control, only reaction, only presence, only disappearance. And in this disappearance, the contours of truth emerge. The lover leaves, the body fails, the friends grow distant, the accolades gather dust. Each loss peels another layer of self. Each grief is a mirror showing what was never truly ours. We do not lose what we possessed, we lose the belief that we ever possessed it. All things pass not from malice, but from nature. To accept this is to cease clutching. To cease clutching is to breathe. The world is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a fire to sit beside in silence. We gather around it not to decode its flames, but to feel its warmth, knowing it will eventually die. In that dying, there is no injustice, only inevitability. The wise man does not feed the fire with hope. He watches it burn, feels its glow, and lets it fade. He does not demand that it last. He does not curse the cold. What then remains when all illusions have been stripped away? Not despair, but lucidity. Not emptiness, but space. Not defeat, but stillness. In the absence of striving, we begin to see. Not through the eyes of desire, but through the eyes of awareness. Awareness does not cling, it does not crave, it witnesses. And in witnessing, it dissolves the boundaries of self. The seer becomes the seen, the watcher fades into the watching. This is not transcendence. It is not divine. It is the simplest of things. It is the breath that enters and leaves. It is the sound of distant rain. It is the ache in your chest that does not speak, does not resolve, does not end. It is the truth that life is not a story, but a momentary alignment of shadows, passing across a wall that forgets them. Let the shadows pass. Let the will fall silent. Let the need for meaning wither in the cold. There is nothing to understand, nothing to attain. There is only the falling away, the quiet dying of desire, the end of becoming. And in that end, the beginning of peace. Not the peace of fulfillment, but the peace of absence. Of no longer needing anything. Of no longer needing to be. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of need. When the will lies quiet, not from exhaustion but from surrender, a new world reveals itself. Not a better world, not a joyful one, but a naked one. The ornaments fall away, the masks melt. What remains is not the person we thought we were, but something without name or desire, a witness to passing forms. The body continues, but the hunger within it is seen for what it is, not a flaw, not a sin, but a mechanism. The will to survive, to possess, to be recognized, it grinds on like an ancient machine, blind and tireless. But now we no longer mistake its movement for our own. We observe, we do not intervene. We let the machine wear itself down against the quiet stone of awareness. Pleasure reveals itself as the brief cessation of pain. It is not a state in itself, but a lull. The sweetness of a kiss, the laughter of companionship, the warmth of sun on skin each is a flicker against the dark. And when they fade, as they must, we are not bereft. We are returned to what is always there, the dull ache of being, the steady throb of the will. We do not curse the loss. We do not reach to recreate. We acknowledge the passing. We remain. To remain is the great renunciation, not to act, but to abide, to live without acquisition, to endure the emptiness without reaching for ornament or distraction. In this endurance, there is a thinning. The self begins to feel less like a center and more like a current. Thoughts come and go, but they are no longer binding. Emotions rise and fall, but they no longer dictate movement. The mind is no longer a throne room, but a mirror. The world reflects itself, and we no longer grasp at the reflection. There is grief in this, but not sorrow. The grief of watching the familiar dissolve the narratives, the identities, the cherished illusions. But beneath this grief is a gentler truth. Nothing real is lost. What passes is what was never ours. What fades is what never truly was. We grieve the departure of the dream, not the substance. And in that grief, space opens. Not for new dreams, but for stillness. Stillness is not withdrawal. It is not retreat from the world. It is the absence of compulsion. One can walk through the market, touch another's hand, listen to the cries of a child, and still remain in stillness. Because stillness does not resist, experience it simply does not cling. It is the full presence of being without the burden of becoming. In stillness, life is not improved, it is permitted. And in that permission, something curious begins to emerge. Not meaning, but reverence. Not purpose, but presence. The fragile, temporary beauty of each moment becomes more vivid, not because it promises anything, but because it demands nothing. A flower opens and dies. A stranger smiles and forgets. A song begins and ends. None of it is held. None of it is claimed. All of it is sacred in its transience. Sacred not in the sense of divine decree, but in the quiet awe that arises when we no longer demand permanence, when we no longer insist that life serve us. The sacred is what appears when the ego disappears. It is what was always there, obscured by the noise of striving. The sacred is the world itself, unveiled, not improved, not purified, but simply seen. And when we see it, truly see it, there is no longer any need to speak of happiness. Happiness becomes a trivial pursuit, a child's game. What matters is not feeling good, but seeing clearly. What matters is not escape from pain, but intimacy with what is. We do not transcend suffering by solving it. We transcend it by no longer identifying with the one who suffers. The one who suffers is the one who seeks, the one who imagines a better life, a more fulfilling future, a version of self that is whole and unbroken. But that one is a phantom, a ghost born of memory and fear. When we look for it, we find nothing. When we stop looking, we find ourselves here not as subject, not as object, but as the space between. The emptiness that holds all things. This emptiness is not despair. It is peace stripped of narrative. It does not soothe, it does not promise, it simply allows. And in its allowance, we are undone. The ego unravels, the will fades, and we are left with nothing, and this nothing is the source of all freedom. Freedom not to become, but to cease becoming, not to assert, but to relinquish, not to find meaning, but to dissolve the need for it. To suffer is to be born into this clarity. To be free is to remain there. Time does not move forward, it deepens. With each passing moment, we do not advance, we descend. We descend into the layers of what has always been, hidden beneath the noise of anticipation. There is no arrival, there is only unfolding. And in the slow unfurling of being, we begin to feel the subtle contours of our sorrow not as a wound to be closed, but as a geography to be understood. The sorrow of existence is not episodic, it is structural. It seeps into even the brightest hours, haunting the peripheries of joy. Not because life fails us, but because it cannot be otherwise. To be conscious is to be splitto, feel the ache of what is against the shadow of what could never be. We are built to ache, not from defect, but from design. The ache is the proof of our awareness, the echo of what has no source. In the still hours of the night, when no task demands us, and no illusion distracts us, the weight of being presses close. It does not threaten, it envelops. We are not crushed by it, but cradled. For in the quiet acceptance of our smallness, we discover the boundaries of what we truly are. Not authors of our fate, not possessors of meaning, but passing apertures through which the world briefly gazes at itself. The need to matter, to leave a trace, is the final tether. It binds even the weary soul to the wheel of becoming, but the trace fades, always. Even the stars that guide the sailors will vanish. Even the monuments built to defy time will crumble into dust no longer named. Legacy is a mirage, an attempt to solidify the self in a world where nothing holds. When we see this clearly, not with bitterness but with calm, the need to be remembered falls away like the husk of a dream at dawn. To release the self from its claim upon permanence is not to abandon value, it is to purify it. A single act of kindness, freed from the hope of recognition, becomes a movement of the eternal. A moment of presence, absent of ego, becomes a gesture of the infinite. In the erasure of the self, something impersonal awakens, not cold, but free from demand. Not distant, but unchained from identity. We do not belong to the world. We are not its children, nor its chosen. We are its dream, and as dreams go, we flicker and vanish without residue. This is not cause for mourning, it is the condition for awe. That anything appears at all, that consciousness arises for even a moment within flesh destined to rot, is enough, more than enough. It is sacred precisely because it ends. When we cease asking for life to make sense, we begin to see it. The curve of a dying leaf, the silence between words, the way shadows stretch before dusk. These are not metaphors, they are the content of truth, not symbols of something greater, but what is left when nothing greater is needed. We no longer search for signs. We look, and that is enough. The mind, long burdened by questions it cannot answer, grows quiet, not because it has found conclusions, but because it has accepted its limits. The most honest thoughts are the ones that lead nowhere. They end in a pause, not in a plan. They drop us at the threshold of what cannot be said, and there they leave us. The soul, if there is such a thing, lives in this pause. There is a grace in being forgotten, in not being needed, in walking the earth without claim or echo. The noise of history fades, and what remains is the soft rhythm of existence itself, the rhythm of a body breathing without audience, of a sky shifting without witness. This rhythm does not require our interpretation. It continues with or without us, and in knowing this, we finally step aside. To step aside is not to vanish, it is to return, not to origins, but to originlessness, to the place before names, to the silence before the self began speaking. We return not to who we were, but to the space in which we always were, not as persons but as presence. In this space, time slows, not in the sense of duration, but in the sense of depth. Each moment expands into eternity because we no longer demand it lead to anything. And in the hollow of that moment, beyond all seeking, we rest, not as victors, not as survivors, but as beings who have nothing left to want, nothing left to become. This is the threshold of life's final truth, not death as an event, but as a condition of clarity. The recognition that all things are already ending, always ending, not with violence, but with gentleness. The tree does not weep for its leaves as they fall. The sky does not hold the clouds that pass through it. And we, who once grasped so tightly to names and futures, find our hands growing still, open, empty. There is no final revelation, no bright answer awaiting at the end. The world remains, as it is, quiet, indifferent, beautiful. It does not explain, it does not comfort. But in the absence of explanation, we begin to feel it fully. The way wind moves across skin, the way silence fills a room once filled with voices, the way everything we feared losing was never truly ours to keep. Peace does not come through victory. It comes when the war within no longer finds a reason to fight, when the self, long burdened with its endless narratives and justifications, loosens its grip, when even sorrow is no longer resisted, but permitted to pass like weather through an unguarded landscape. We cease to be defenders of a story and become listeners to what remains. What remains is not absence, but presence without possession, not nihilism, but a gentle disillusionment, the kind that sees clearly and no longer flinches. A kind of love arises here not for things or people or ideals, but for the moment itself, for its texture, its weight, its softness. We no longer need to name it, to own it. We dwell in it, quietly, like animals warmed by the sun. This is the meaning of suffering, not as punishment, not as test, but as unveiling. It tears away what cannot last and shows us what does not need to. It does not lead us out of the world, but deeper into it. Past the illusions, past the ache of expectation, into the marrow of being where nothing is promised, and everything is permitted to simply be. We no longer look for a path, because we see that we are the path. The dust beneath our feet, the breath we carry, the fading light upon our skin, these are the answers. Not to the questions we once asked, but to the deeper ones we never dared to speak, the ones beneath language, the ones that dissolve as soon as they are touched. In the end, there is no ending, only the fading of what was never ours, only the soft folding of awareness into what it always was. There is no conclusion, no message. Only this: the pain was real, the longing was real, the letting go is real. And now, the candle goes out, and all is still.